Okay, so I'm here to speak about the recently tabled and withdrawn Equal Opportunities Bill. Obviously, the government saw it fit, for whatever reason, to withdraw the bill, but I think we still want to discuss and understand some of the controversial aspects of this bill that caused them to withdraw it, and know that perhaps it's on pause. It's not necessarily put away in the closet forever, but I believe that whether this government or the next will certainly want to look to continue to amend it and perhaps come up with a final version that would be acceptable to the general population, Belizean people, including the Council of Churches and the Catholic Church. What I wanted to say is that I did review the most recent draft, the one that was tabled, and I find that it was amended significantly from just 5 or 6 months ago. And I think they addressed a lot of the concerns that the church and other concerned citizens had. But there are still, of course, some issues, definitely the reason for some protests that occurred. But I wanted to talk maybe specifically about some of the lacking pieces or what I see as some of the problems still in the bill that perhaps would need to be looked at before it becomes acceptable, and particularly also to see how the bill would affect businesses. Okay, so the bill would look to establish a commission that will investigate any complaints and also investigate what they might see as discriminatory practices. The problem with the commission, as far as I see it, is that it would be a politically appointed commission. It would be appointed by the Governor General, but based on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Council of Churches, Unions, AIDS Commission. There are a list included in the bill of the persons who would recommend the people who form the commission. My issue with that is that any politically appointed group will have some influence by those said politicians. And I think that appointing a group similar to the way the Senate is an appointed body rather than elected could lend to political interference. I would not have a problem if this commission were investigating public authorities only, but the fact is that they would have authority to investigate private individuals and private companies. And so, that being the case, and where there would be significant fines and perhaps even jail time, that could be the penalty for persons who discriminate or contravene the bill, which, if it were to become an act, I believe that then the commission, the investigative branch that would look after infractions of an act, should possibly be a department of the police or some group within a civil service, but not politically appointed persons.
Human rights, or the Bill of Rights, is enshrined in our Constitution, and we all know, or maybe we don't, but we all know from case law and jurisprudence that these rights are enforced against public authorities usually. If you go all the way back in history, in case law and the jurisprudence, you will see that these rights are enforced against a public authority. And I believe there's a very good reason for this. When you start trying to enforce rights, one person's rights against another person, private individual, you automatically start getting into restricting individuals' freedoms and rights. And this bill, for example, it affects clearly freedom of conscience, right? And it gets into everyday life of individuals. It gets into the businesses, the decision business owners make. It gets into decisions a property owner makes. It gets into decisions of whom I want to trade with. And this is the essence of freedom of conscience, right? We carry through life, weighing things, making our own assessments, and this is what a liberal democracy is also about. And I think in Belize we have done extraordinarily well in maintaining amiable relations, very good relations in how we maneuver through our civic life. But this bill is trying to force us to decide in certain ways that may go against our consciences. And I don't think that is good for democracy. I don't think it is necessary for our society at this time, or I don't know if it will ever be necessary.
The Commission's role would be to investigate and look into discriminatory practices in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And one of the issues is for a respondent to a complaint. If a respondent to a complaint, a person accused of discriminatory practices, claims to have acted in good conscience, claims to have abided by their moral compass or even religious beliefs, I'm not sure that the Act protects them the way it does religious institutions or schools that are run and operated by religious institutions. In other words, while a church has the protection, priests have the protection, and any church activity, including school activity, if that school is operated and run by a church, they have some protection in what actions they can take in terms of discriminating, where they can lean on the fact that they cannot contravene their religious beliefs. But the Act doesn't clearly state that an individual, a private individual or a private entity, such as a company, has a right not to contravene their religious beliefs. And I think that is one of the big issues why the churches have objected to this bill so far. Now, I certainly agree that we should be compassionate and we should provide services and goods to everyone. But we should not be able to give rights to any group, whether it's a minority group or not, in which their granting of rights to them takes away rights or forces another individual to lose their own rights. And so what I'm trying to say is, as a business, the bill probably needs to be very clear that my rights as an individual or as a company cannot be taken away in order to provide rights to another class or another person. I think in most cases that would not happen, but it may occur if an individual is asked to participate in what they consider to be a sinful act, and if they provide services normally, but in one instance, in order to provide the service to a specific group or class, where that act may specifically contravene their religious beliefs, then I believe that the act in that case would be contrary to the constitution of the land.
We have done very well as a community. Let's take, for example, some of the sections that it refers to who you are supposed to hire. Some of the sections refer to who you are allowed to rent your premises to. But let's say, for example, a hotel owner, for example, has certain beliefs, right? And he is asked to rent out his hotel to perhaps a group of religious persons. Let's use an extreme situation, a group of religious persons. And he doesn't feel like, based on his beliefs, he does not want to do that. Why should he be forced to do that? Or vice versa. A hotel owner who is a devout Christian, right? He has that belief. He has that freedom to believe in Christian values. And he is asked by maybe a group of, let's say, homosexuals, to be extreme, to rent out his hotel for a big party or something, and he does not feel like he wants to do that. That's his freedom, that's his right to refuse. Why is he being forced, which is what this legislation would be doing? Why is he being forced to make a decision for his private business that he may not want to? And so I think this bill smacks of it. It diminishes freedom of conscience, it diminishes freedom of religion, and I don't think that is correct. That's what happens when you start enforcing rights in the private law arena. We get into a bickering, we get into, instead of a society unifying, it gets into creating tension, and perhaps every behavior, every action or encounter between humans can then lead to a human rights claim. Is this the kind of society we want? I don't think so. And that's what this bill, from what I see, is doing.
The Act does state in Section 76 that it should have no influence or control, no direction or control, I think are the words that are used. It should have no direct influence or control by an outside authority. But then at the same time in Section 110, it states that funding for the Commission is by government's National Assembly, as well as by funds that are payable or vested from any lawful source. In other words, the Commission may accept sponsors, or they may acquire funding from sources outside of government. And I see that as a contradiction to the earlier section that says they should have no influence by outside authority, because I believe that funding, money itself, is an influence. And I believe that the Commission, despite the fact they may say otherwise, is undoubtedly going to be influenced by the groups or bodies that donate to their existence. So I believe that a final version of this bill should not allow or permit funding from any other group other than our National Assembly.
Another big point is that the Commission and the Tribunal are not, in my opinion, going to be independent. Our Constitution safeguards an independent judiciary, and that's for very good reason. These commission tribunal are judicial bodies. They make punitive decisions that can punish people, put them to jail, so they are judicial bodies, but in my opinion, they are not independent. And the reason I say that is because the bill clearly states, and if we look at the different drafts of the bill, a couple drafts earlier referred to funding by independent agencies or international agencies, and that is scary for Belize. You know, if a commission or tribunal is being funded by an agency, an international agency, then more than likely they will be appeasing the interests of those agencies. That's where their money will be coming from, their salary will be coming from. This is a dangerous precedent to set for Belize, and it erodes the whole concept of our constitution that safeguards an independent judiciary.
Generally, our constitution grants that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And an accuser normally has the burden of proof to show that the accused is guilty of an offense. I think in this bill, it seems as if my understanding of the bill would be that if a person has acted in a way where he is accused of discrimination, where there's a complaint against him, the burden of proof that he acted not in a discriminatory fashion seems to be on the respondent. In other words, the person who has been accused has to prove their innocence, and that seems to be contrary to our constitution as well. So where the burden of proof for discriminatory actions goes, I think the bill needs to be amended so that the burden of proof is on the complainant, not on the respondent. There are mention of discrimination for businesses who are employing people, that a person cannot choose to employ one class over another based on discrimination. I do have, in particular, there's one class or one section that I believe could be a very grave concern for businesses, where it speaks of discrimination against a person for what is called irrelevant criminal records. Where it speaks to irrelevant criminal records, it speaks to a person who has been maybe alleged of a crime or accused of a crime. A crime is alleged against him, but the complaint is withdrawn. The person may have been found innocent, or the prosecution has withdrawn the case, or the complainant in a criminal matter has withdrawn a case. But my concern would be that in Belize we have such a very low standard of conviction in criminal cases. We have many cases where persons are accused but there's no evidence, and I think that it could be a concern that somebody who, for example, is accused of rape maybe have several accusations of rape or even murder. And in Belize, we know, we watch the news. Many times these cases result in nolle prosequi. Many times the witnesses fail to appear in court. And so there are many instances where even the police, the chief of police sometimes, the prosecutor sometimes will state that they are very much aware that this is the person who committed the crime, but we lack the evidence to convict them. Well, if we lack the evidence to convict them, those are the cases that may be considered according to the bill. an irrelevant criminal record.
I must say, having read through the bill thoroughly, there are some parts that I don't see, for example, why those parts cannot be taken and made into their own legislation. I think it's part 6. It talks about the rights of persons with HIV and AIDS. Part 6 that deals with prevention and care. It talks about restrictions on HIV testing, HIV testing centers. Those are acceptable. I think those sections can be formulated and have its own legislation to protect persons with HIV in getting testing, in getting counseling. Those are progressive, those are something all our society would support, right? So it's not like I'm just bashing this bill to bash this bill, but there are certain fundamental aspects to this bill. The parts that affect freedom of conscience, the parts that affect our sovereignty, the parts that affect our independent judiciary. Being somebody in the legal arena, I just cannot support. You know, there must be another way to protect persons who are deemed downtrodden without also affecting the freedoms of other individuals.